what does it mean to be an ally, and is ally the right word to be used? We spoke last time of being a co-conspirator, accomplices, supporters. There's many ways that that we can show up, but what is really important is how we show up. And very often there is this place where we're so eager to help and support that we forget that this is not our project, this is not happening on our land, and there is a need to sit back and listen. Would you like introducing yourself again, please?
Mishmin Tuhis, Conrakat Kanyon, CoyoteWoman, Sayers-Roods. I identify as a California native, two-spirited individual. My pronouns are she, they, coyote. I am daughter of tribal chairwoman Anne Marie Sayers of the Indian Kanyon-Mutsun band of Costanoan Ohlone people. My home is Indian Canyon, and I'm very lucky and privileged to be on the land of my ancestors. Currently, right now, today, I am in Tamian, Ohlone territory, which if you are from or are familiar with the San Francisco Bay Area region, I'm a little south of there by Santa Clara. So the term of the Bay Area is known as Ohlone. However, due to colonization, that is a misnomer. And also, I am a proud Ohlone person. So I have a lot of fun helping educators and community members become aware of ways that we can honor truth in history, and that is by acknowledging the layers of history and the impact of our communities, and just ways that we can become more familiar with the many perspectives. And so as a California Native person, I'm Mutsun, I'm Ohlone, I'm Chumash. I have a little bit of a European ancestry, so I say I'm a Euromut, and a little bit of Mohawk, and I am finding ways to reconnect to all of those lineages, to be proud of all of that I am and all of my ancestors. So I'm definitely glad to be here. Thank you.
Kanyon, I know you spoke of this piece of land that your mother is living on, and where you were raised. But my understanding is that you opened it to, other tribes for ceremonies. And you have also opened it to, and when I said you, I mean, your community, a tribe, and you opened it also to other people, non-American, non-Native American, non-Native. And can you share more about these processes?
I need to give a tiny bit of history. So 1850s, colonization of California. We have the missions, the 21 missions that were established where Native peoples couldn't be Native peoples. That's why we got called Costaños and Costanoan. And then the next wave of genocide is when the Mexican occupation transpired. And then the next wave was when the gold rush transpired. Gold rush, it was legal. $5 a head, 50 cents a scalp to eradicate the California Native. The US government spent $1.4 million. After that, there was this thing called the Dow's Act of 1887, where it crosshatched the greater portion of California, so any California native can sign up and get land. This is 1887, right after the 1850s, when it was legal to eradicate California natives. So there were some, and my great-grandfather, who identified as a California native of the territory, was part of this, and President Taft signed an allotment that gave him trust allotted land. That has been in my family, and my grandmother stewarded it, and then my mother, having been born and raised on the land, wanted to homestead and build a log cabin for her family. She went upriver towards the waterfalls a little bit, and the BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, said, no, that's not your land. She goes, yes, it is. And they were trying to point out little lines here and there. She fought with less than 3% chance for over 8 years to reattain the land of her ancestors, and she succeeded. That being said, it was in the late 70s, 80s, actually mid 80s, that my mother learned that the Native American did not have the right to practice their religion, until 1978. And she was quite upset. We actually have a small mini documentary that is currently making its rounds through screening processes. It was screened on KQED, and they published it on YouTube. I will put that in the link. I will put that in the chat box after a little bit of the conversation. So when my mother reattained the land, and she realized that many Native and Indigenous peoples have not been able to practice their culture and their religion freely, and many people in the Bay Area don't even have land to practice. You can't quite have a lodge or go on a vision quest in urban territories. So she opened the land up towards all Indigenous people in need of land for sharing ceremony, and that was my environment. I recognize that I'm a very privileged California native, able to say that I was raised with both traditional and intertribal and international culture sharing protocols and ceremonies. And so our community is tiny. Um, there are many Ohlone descendants or people who have ancestry from the Bay Area before contact. Uh, and our communities are deeply impacted by this, and there are some community members who are still healing, and there are many people who are impacted by like the assimilation of California. Kill the Indian, save the man. Many natives were brought from different territories and dropped off into San Francisco in the 60s, and um, over time, especially in the 80s, more California indigenous resurgence started occurring, more bands and tribal groups started growing. And so Indian Canyon is a safe haven, and it has served as a safe haven even before contact. Because when the natives who were seeking refuge from the missions, who did not like the constraints of the missions of California, fled, they would run away. And Cienega Valley is known as swamplands, so they were seeking refuge in these areas. And there's even a village site at the mouth of the canyon where my ancestors have always been from. And this is a beautiful space. And so I was raised off the grid in a log cabin growing up. As a teenager, I would proclaim that I was deprived of modern amenities and that not many kids could empathize. And as I grow, I recognize how amazing of a treasure that is. And so we have both intertribal and intercultural ceremonies that transpire, people following Indigenous protocol by coming up and offering gifts to the community and the stewards of the land, and then seeking permission and consent to, one, be present there, two, have a conversation about the next step of why they're there, and then finding out if it's possible, i.e., they came and visited on one day asking permission if they can have a lodge or if they can go on a vision quest in the next season or things of that nature. And following those protocols is a really beautiful thing because it's the original way and it's respectful. And so having that as my upbringing, I also watched my mother impact many non-Indigenous community members. Like we have an MOU with San Francisco State University where there's a biannual field trip, and they come in springtime and autumn time where they have a field trip. We share a potluck, and every single one is different. Like we talk about similar things, like you get a walk of the land, and we have a general direction of where the conversation goes, because these are new students each time. However, every single time something new has happened, from my mom being a signatory for the initiative of banning fracking in our county, to a young woman walking down from her vision quest on the third day because she knew she wasn't fully ready to do the 4 days with no food and no water on the hill. And before we ambushed her, we did ask her, would it be appropriate if she would be willing to share any element of her story, and she consented and perfectly got to share that experience with the students of what she went through and how she was navigating that. And that's a unique perspective that you can never schedule, you can never plan. This concept of Western settler time is foolish. So I was raised in this environment in Indian Canyon. I continue to help maintain this. However, in these times of this pandemic, there's less happening on our land because we are encouraging our community to be safe. And so I'm blessed to have Indian Canyon, and I'm recognizing the legacy that I am here to continue, that is of my mother's and of my matrilineal line. And so the way we put it is Indian Canyon is a safe haven. It continues to be. We open it for Indigenous people seeking land for ceremony and for education, for those who are reconnecting to this knowledge. I have big plans for the canyon because I am a permaculture certificate design holder. I navigate many amazing gatherings and conferences of different groups of people who have like-minded approaches towards a sustainable future, and I would love to work with the groups to remind people what it means to restore the right relationship with the earth. So from earth-based spiritual practices that are not culturally appropriative to touching and engaging and listening to our sacred living systems and the soil, and water restoration efforts and watershed and bioregional education. All of these things, I am really motivated to encourage and be inclusive around this knowledge, but appropriately. There are some ceremonies, songs, and cultural aspects that are to remain private and very exclusive, and that's okay. We could be told no about some of these things, and there are many things that we need to come together in community and share and be aware of. And so I am working towards that future and connecting with amazing like-minded beings who are interested to join me in this journey. So that's a little bit about Indian Canyon, and I'll definitely add a link soon.
Thank you, Kenyon, and welcoming Big Win. Hey, Big Win has maybe you can reintroduce yourself. We have new people here, and tell us a little bit about where you're from and your journey to where you are today. We don't hear you well. A little closer to the mic.
Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah, a little better. Yeah.
Bahini Sinana Behin Jabine Nuhu Usi Hasisbe na Asit na Hinono'eino na Hatenicha. Hello. It's good to see you all. I apologize for my tardiness. And my name is Bigwind, and I'm Northern Arapaho tribal member from the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming. And what else?
Your journey. So there is something quite special about where you are from, that reservation, and also what you do. Also reminding everyone that Big Wind is a two-spirit. I mean, not reminding them and telling them, it's important. And also that there is also another duality in terms of where you are from, a place where there's a lot of oil extraction or gas extraction.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
Yeah,
I'll start.
Okay.
So essentially, you know, where I grew up in this community, we're considered an oil and gas tribe. And so being born into this, on this reservation, both tribes, the Northern Arapaho and the Eastern Shoshone, both receive dividends, monthly dividends from the oil and gas industry. And you know, the little bit of history about Wyoming in general is that the conception of Wyoming was based off of mineral extraction, not just fossil fuels, but, you know, uranium and other resources that the area is really dense in, especially when it comes to the continental divide. There's a lot of different minerals and whatnot that are kind of in sheets. And so you have like coal bed, sewer gas, you know, things like that, you know, in this area where it's very rich. And so, you know, I feel like very young, I recognize, you know, the environmental injustice that was not only being like happening throughout, you know, our territory, but like within our own system, intentionally, you know. The business councils were created to benefit and to push for colonial ideas like this, you know, fossil fuel consumption and things like that. And so now, like, I feel like what got me like kind of thrusted, I've been organizing my whole life, but what really thrusted me into like water protection, land defense, was Standing Rock. And my, you know, the Fort Laramie Treaty, it's a large treaty that encompasses 25 different tribes, and it's a large piece of land when you're talking about the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. And, you know, my 5 times great grandfather, Chief Blackcole, he was a signatory of that treaty, you know. And so I felt like it was my moral obligation to help out, you know, over in North Dakota at that time, help out, you know, allies, because I also have Dakota, Lakota, Nakota blood as well, but also have relatives who are enrolled up there and whatnot. So I wanted to help out our family, you know. And I ended up spending 6 months out there, getting arrested twice. And that kind of really set me on a trail to really recognize that, you know, I feel like I had an epiphany that the way that white people are approaching this problem, or dominant society is approaching this problem, that we're not going to get we're not going to receive the blessings, and we're not going to get where we want to be in time by just playing by their rules. And so seeing a lot of, you know, nonprofits making a lot of money off of the, you know, Standing Rock water protector movement, but we're also like limiting ideations, limiting actions. And then, you know, when that comes down, Standing Rock, it started off by 10,000 different indigenous people from all over the world coming together, you know, in North Dakota. And to see it, you know, as a person, when I was there in August, and then being like forcibly removed by the government in February, the whole dynamic changed once it hit viral. It's really crazy because that area, you know, there was a lot of parachuting allies that came in. And by the end, a lot of the natives had left because we got pushed out by white people, essentially. By the end, camp was like 70% white. All allies thought they had the best intentions, but you know, when you have indigenous people who are coming into this area, in camp just got colonized, and to see like a rise and a fall of that civilization that happened there on a 50-acre plot of land was just changed my life. And that's when I decided to be like, how am I physically putting my, you know, and we all have different ways about how we fight, you know. Since then, you know, in the past almost 3 years, I've been arrested 7 times, fighting the fossil fuel industry. And last year I was fighting a felony in Michigan, and because of the our prayers and because of some kick-ass lawyers um, and our ancestors that are watching after us, uh, I beat all those charges. None of those charges led to criminal convictions, even the felony and anything like that. And I thank a lot of, the supporters that I've had and whatnot. And also, like, I know what I'm doing is right. And if we continue to try to play by their game and like allow them, and that's the thing, like, I feel like, as an indigenous person coming from a, targeted community, I have nothing to lose. The only thing we have to lose is our lives. And I mean, that's literally it. But people who come from wealth, or they come from, they have like a certain reputation to uphold or something like that, I feel like they're more susceptible to being like, no, we have to like follow these rules, because how is the public going to like, do these things, right? But as indigenous people, we're always arrestables, regardless. Like, whether we're fighting addiction or whether we're fighting for the water, or fighting for the land, like we have always been arrestables. As a kid growing up, seeing my parents and my family arrested, it wasn't that big of a deal for me. I'm not going to tell indigenous people who've already endured this trauma to go out there and get arrested. That's what I'm here to fight. But I am telling people who consider themselves allies and accomplices to be able to utilize that privilege, especially if you're fair-skinned. You're not going to be treated as bad as people who've been, targeted and arrestables for centuries.
Right. That's so important. So important. You had also this other experience at COP25,
Right. Yes.
and that's also another relationship with allies that left you a sour taste.
Yeah, I feel like after Setting Rock, I honestly was not educated enough to speak about climate change or like anything like that. And it, you know, I recognized, I was like, why have I been a part of so many failed campaigns in my life? Like, looking back, and I was like, well, I don't have the necessary skill set, the resources, or the support network to do effective work in my community, or, the way that I wanted to do things, and be a part of effective campaigns. And so after that, went and got trained by ITEP and, a couple other places on not only what the correlation between fossil fuel industries and climate change, but how to talk to it about it to everyday people, not being a scientist, and I don't need to be a scientist. Yeah. Sorry about that. But, I don't need to be a scientist to know what's going on in our communities, because we can see it, where I'm from, on our reservation, we have all of our water comes from the mountains. We're right by the mountains, and it all comes from these glaciers that are rapidly melting and won't be here in 30 years. And a lot of this land, it's been polluted by the fossil fuel industry, and because of loopholes and whatnot, because of the, so I wanted to figure out how I could, start implementing and pushing for traditional ecological knowledge to be in not only local, state, and regional climate mitigation plans, but international ones. And that's what, essentially got me into these circles, to be able to be selected to go to COP25, and I was a part of a all indigenous delegation of young people. There was 13 of us. We were all in, indigenous youth from around the world, from the diaspora and tribal members as well. Um, and it was like the second day. I feel like we had pretty high expectations when we first were like, okay, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna go out there, and we went out there. And by the second day, we were like, we're not going to be heard in the way that we want. we're not going to be taken seriously if we don't make some noise. You know what I mean? And so in that situation, you know, we were there for 2 weeks in Spain. You know, it wasn't even supposed to be in Spain. It was supposed to be, the prompt for last year was that it was Indigenous Voices for Indigenous Lands, and that it was going to be down in South America for the first time ever since COP has been held, you know. And that didn't happen. It didn't go. We were in Chile, you know. There was some uprising going down there, and they didn't want the publicity on that situation that's going down in, you know, South America, with a lot of these right-wing governments taking over power. And so we were, you know, I feel like a lot of us as Indigenous people are like, why the fuck are we going to some colonizer country to like talk about Indigenous rights? You know what I mean? And I feel like we did get very, you know, we got frustrated. We had to figure out a plan. We were told, you know, as Indigenous people to be, they liked us for our pictures. They liked us for, you know, the land acknowledgements and things like that. But, you know, when we're talking about the issues at hand and, you know, in our communities, they didn't want to listen to us. We weren't Greta Thunberg, you know. And so trying to figure that out, you know, we actually ended up, you know, leading the march of 500,000 people with the Global Climate Summit that happened in Madrid, Spain. When we got to the stage, there was supposed to be a part for Indigenous bloc of Indigenous people from around the world, and they're supposed to give 7 different Indigenous femmes the right to speak on stage about the issues that happen in our communities. When we got there, they said, there's actually some famous Spanish actors and actresses here, so we are only allowing for 1 Indigenous person to speak, 3 minutes. And we were like, no, it's not gonna go down like that. Like, we came this far. So we stormed the stage. Probably about 100 and something of us, Indigenous people from around the world, just kind of, and you know, led by Indigenous youth. And we started, you know, we got to have a conversation. You know, one of our Indigidels got to have a conversation with Greta and was like, hey, like, we're not being taken seriously here. You need to lend us your platform. And within a couple days, we set up a press conference where that was supposed to be led by Greta Thunberg, and there was another famous European celebrity activist that was, like, you know, also there, and they were going to speak. But, you know, what we had planned is that there was Indigenous people, there was an Indigenous person. Anyways, we had a panel where Greta Thunberg did not speak. You know, they lended their platform over for the global arena, and that wasn't planned or anything like that. Like, we made that happen at the national, you know, international floor. And then another thing happening is essentially COP has been very privileged, and a lot of people go there under observer status, faith organizations and people who have the means to do those things. And a lot of grassroots people don't have the means to do those things. And so a lot of privileged people have been monitoring and like watching the proceedings go on for over a quarter century, and nothing has really been done. And so we created some cross-racial, you know, organizing, you know, emergent strategy type stuff to be able to lead like the largest unsanctioned protests within the walls of the COP25. There was over 300 people that were forcibly removed, and, you know, people got hurt. You know, there was like, people did get hurt. Like, the Spanish police came in, and a lot, you know, there was like an Indigenous woman from Uganda that was like taken away from her kid. And so, you know,
I
it was
remember that.
very difficult, you know, in there to be like, we came this far to be treated the same, you know, the same way, you know, but we knew what we had to do to be heard and to be taken seriously. You know, we weren't being taken seriously unless we were making these larger, you know, cross-racial coalitions.
Right.
to make that these things happen. That in these situations, what we were talking about is like we wanted indigenous rights and included inside the Paris rulebook, under certain sections, to allow us to have a safeguard that would prioritize our traditional ecological knowledge, so that we could have shared solutions, so that we could have so that we can work together for the future, because that's what we need.
Yeah. Thank you, Big Win. Yeah, I can rebound to that, and but I want to remind that always keep in mind that everything that we're sharing right now has a context, and really, for a lot of people that call on us to resist, but peacefully resist, it has such a level of, as Big Win said, privilege. Yeah, we can be peaceful, but in some areas of the world, nothing is really peaceful. When the cobalt is extracted in Central Africa, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's done by children. And there is this huge mine, so there is really nothing peaceful about it. It's very violent, very toxic, and harmful. Daiara, thank you for joining us. What can you share with us? Where you from and how you live these uneasy relationships, uneasy alliances? Oh, she disappeared.
So hello.
Oh, no,
Sorry.
you're here. Hello.
I spent the whole night in ceremony. Yesterday, actually, we had the 19th is the Indian Day. So we have a very intense journey of activities. During the whole month, we usually have many activities in Brasilia. We have the gathering that is called the Freeland Camp, that uses to gather like more than 4,000 indigenous leaders from all over the country. It's one of the largest gatherings, indigenous gatherings in South America. And it was all canceled because of the COVID crisis. And so we decided to launch an online freelance camp that has been crazy because everybody's doing lots of lives. And personally, I have this program on the radio that I am coordinator. And we are doing excellent talks every night with indigenous specialists about every sort of theme. And yesterday we were talking about the urgency of decolonization. It's really hard to speak about alliances. I think it's always I don't know how to say it in English. Je vais essayer en français, voir si tu m'aides. Il y a beaucoup de pièges.
Traps.
Trumps.
There are many traps.
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 Okay.
Yes.
Okay. There are many traps in the idea of the whole relation with what we consider today to be a Western culture or white culture, or the statal official institutions, or all the institutions, these freaking institutions, no matter if they are like national or international, as Big Win was talking about the COP. Those spaces, like for me, the UN and all that kind of spaces would never represent me. they are not made for work at all. The same way many of the ministries, or I don't know, National Foundation of the Indigenous Peoples here in Brazil, it was created not to work, it's not it's not to implement any politic at all. It's just to do the opposite. These are institutions of the omission, of the invisibilization, of the denial. These are racist institutions, and they will never be a space for us to have a decent, balanced dialogue with anyone. And so nowadays in Brazil, we are facing, as you may know, a really crazy situation with this guy that was elected, and that yesterday went to a manifestation pro-dictatorship intervention to support the possibility of having a dictatorship intervention, and he is the president.
And he has been praising the previous military dictator in Brazil forever.
Yeah. He has this whole history of making, like, como on dit hommage?
Praise.
Homage.
Homage in English too. And
Homage.
Yeah.
Homage or praise.
Praise?
Yeah.
Okay. He praises torture.
Yeah.
Publicly. And all kinds of human rights violation is kind of his stuff. And one interesting thing, I don't know if it is, yes, it's interesting because actually his government in this first year that he accomplished demonstrated like how fragile is democracy. He just managed to crash in less than a month all those institutions. Like, there is no place for the Ministry of Human Rights, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Justice. He canceled all the comment on dit? Oh my God, sorry, my English is not good enough. The social councils, like the national councils with social representation, as the Council of Human Rights or Council of Indigenous Politics, it was all cancelled. It doesn't exist anymore. There is no space. And he put on the responsibility of all these institutions as the National Foundation for Indigenous people that are absolutely anti-indigenous. I'm telling all this story because actually it is in those spaces where we are supposed to talk with our allies. Every time we gather, I don't know, you have a beautiful picture of a forest. I don't know which forest it is, but it could be the Amazon because it's recognizable. Yeah. When people created this crazy Amazon fund, for example, we have an international Amazon fund that was created with the support of several countries, several really, really suspicious countries, because actually they live on the exploitation of the Amazon, etc. Like the mining exploitation. Those are the countries that buy the most of the stolen wood from our territories. They are also buy more, very often, most of the stolen people, the trafficked people from our territories. And these are historically colonizing racist countries. Sorry for talking like that, but it's just like the month, you know, we are just free to talk as we really think. And
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 that's what we want.
yeah,
That's what we need.
and so okay, I don't know, and it's really, yesterday we were talking about like this these epistemological issues we have between cultures, you know.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry about Christianism that thinks that it's possible to pay or surrender from their sins or just with money, just with money. And kind of the situation with the Amazon fund or the carbon credits are really similar. Because when you see the origin from of this money that is sensed to invest on indigenous resistance, they give a little money compared with the damages that are being done to our territories and to our nations. But they give this supposed help with many avec des conditions,
with conditions,
with lots of conditions, lots of conditions.
Yeah.
And so they create through what is supposed to be an alliance a very clever way of manipulate very complex disputes in
system. Some dispute system to resolve disputes.
Yeah, that we have in every indigenous movement or every social movement.
Right.
Just with money, or who is, I don't know. We could talk about the NGOs, you know. I don't know if you know people that just do a living by working with indigenous nations and publicizing books and works and researches. There is a lot of money that goes to sustain those researchers, and they work in communities where we don't even have like money enough to buy a wire for, I don't know, for living.
Right.
So what kind of alliance is that? What kind of administration of transparency we are getting with those alliances? How it's been used to promote politically in some spaces, as our relative was talking, some famous people to, is it to, I don't know, superficialize, to pour pas nous laisser voir la complexité et apprécier profondément ce qui représente les peuples autochtones.
Yes, to avoid showing the complexity of what really represent indigenous people. And that goes back to this very Eurocentric ways of living and seeing the world, which is really, oh, this is how we see it, therefore that should be real.
Yeah.
Right?
So
and
I
not
think
really questioning. I mean, I do remember when I went in the Amazon with a couple of NGOs the very first time, there was something that was missing. There was something that really I could not understand. And I was frustrated because I was asking questions, and I was receiving these answers that were incomplete. Not only incomplete, but like coming out of a script of what they wanted me to see. They didn't want me to see poverty. They didn't want me to see, the dynamic that exists, very different from one community to another. They didn't want me to see that. So I discovered that later, but I remember leaving this environment, this groups, thinking like this is only, not even a quarter of the truth. There's something that's missing, and when you like uncork what's missing, you just fall into this other reality, and then you feel like, gosh, yeah, they are human. They're struggling. Their struggle is not just like, let's say, oil on one side. It's more than that. And we spoke a lot about, how do you leave your traditional knowledge? How do you keep your systems alive? There is a lot of things that are happening, and we tend to really simplify things through that, again, very Eurocentric worldview, and forget what matters.
I don't know if simplify is just the word, because I was thinking about how weirdly fetishist.
It's reductive. So to reduce to something. I think
Yeah,
that's
but
what the word.
I was like talking as an indigenous women from an Amazonian indigenous people, there is a weird fetishism about us. It's like this weird, crazy power porn, soft porn, whatever, green hell fetishism about the indigenous peoples of the Amazon. And we talk a lot about this issue here in Brazil, because about all this idea of why they call us Indians until today, and etc. And all the whole construction of the image of the indigenous in the oh my God, how do you say in the collective imaginary. Does that exist in English? Yeah. Okay.
Collective imagination.
Okay.
Collective
how is it?
unconscious or collective imagination. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Collective consciousness.
Okay. Consciousness. Okay. I think imaginary is easy for me to say. This weird idea of as I was saying the other day, the indigenous magic fairy, all painted with our beautiful paintings, with our beautiful feathers, with our beautiful songs, like kind of alienated in time, as we even related to time in the same way you do. Our perspective and perception of reality is not even the same. And I also always need to call attention when I have an opportunity like this. And I thank you very much. I'd like to know you better in the future. In Brazil, we have more than 350 indigenous nations. Okay, approximately like 40% of these nations are in the Amazon. For sure, the Amazon has been reduced a lot in the last centuries, but we have lots of indigenous nations that are in other biosystems, I don't know, ecosystems, in other kinds of forests. Because for us, every space is a forest. The desert is a forest. The snow is a forest. The beaches are forests because they are full of life. They are full of spirits. And you have indigenous nations in the first places that were invaded, like 2 days ago. An urn, une urne funéraire.
An urn, yes.
A funerary urn.
Urn, yes.
Well, urn.
Urn. No, if we're going to compete with our accent, I don't know where we're going.
we are champions. They found this funerary urn from more than 500 years ago in Salvador, that was actually the first place they invaded. And people were questioning, oh my God, there were really indigenous there? Such a surprise.
Yeah.
The indigenous peoples that still live in the first beaches, in the first territory where the fucking Portuguese arrived like 520 years ago, they are facing they are miscegenized. Oh my God, they are black people. Oh my God, they have curly hair. They are indigenous. They have their nations, they have their languages, they have their prayers, they have their territory, they have their living spirit. And they are facing constantly all sorts of attacks. Like 3 years ago, they killed and decapitated a couple of elderly people. That is Bahia, that is the fight of the Tupinambá Nation. They face, during the COVID, they are facing shootings and fires. We are, como fala luto? We are mourning.
The fight, the struggle, the
we mourning. Are mourning constantly.
Mm.
Sorry.
No.
2 days ago, they killed a teacher in the Amazon forest, Uruauau. A week ago, they killed a Guajajara. He was another teacher. Yesterday, a health assistant, a health professional died of COVID. He was indigenous. Our communities doesn't have access to any public politic because of the discrimination, of all the violations of the state, of this eternal racism. And they still managing to kill our leaders, those that we have taken all the effort to have access to education, to communication. Yesterday, during the Indian Day, it was 23 years. They killed a living man that was sleeping in a bus stop just because he was indigenous. They set fire on him.
Mm.
This month, all of our elders have been criticized publicly by the official institutions of the state. So it's really hard to talk about alliances.
Right.
All the degrees of the violence that is from what hurt us on our flesh to what hurt us in our spirit, in our memory, we find it everywhere. We find it in the universities, in the middle of all these crazy anthropologists. We find it with those funky people that think that they are working with indigenous as well, because they don't even imagine how racist they can be. And the worst of all is that we need them.
Yeah. Oh.
So we struggle a lot to find, to battle for the places of autonomy, self-representation, try to speak from ourselves. I am coordinator of a radio. We try to work like that. We only work with indigenous. In our radio is just indigenous working. We are independent. We are not official. We are not considered the official institution of the indigenous movement in Brazil, because the official institution needs to work with that kind of partner. They need to work with Greenpeace or whatever. They need they need the money of the Ford Foundation to sustain them. And in my organization, we understand, we respect, but we won't. And so we don't have any support because we ask too much, like on est des chiants.
Yeah, well, you as we say, you speak truth to power. Right.
Yeah, but and we just deal with that. It's okay. I believe it's really important to have all those spaces. I know that I just had a very hard words about all those allies. But I think we are in a process of learning.
Yeah.
And the goal is that one day we won't need any intermediaries to deal with our problems.
But it needs to happen now.
Yeah,
that's why
we are trying.
One of the but what I want to say is one of the reasons I've created and offered this space is precisely so we can move beyond this filter that are occupied by the same dominant society, elitist people. And although they come from a struggle too, but it's so easy to fall back into these old patterns of, suddenly I have power and I'm going to decide who gets that money. And
the whole dispute is power. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
The whole dispute is about only the conception of power.
Yes.
The conception of power is this weird word, epistemologic.
Right.
Yesterday in our speech, I don't know if any of you understands Portuguese, but it was really deep. It was wonderful. And one of the points where we get is that very often people ask us about how to exterminate racism, how to end colonization, how to fight, how to kill colonization. And I was just looking at those questions and thinking, how weird is the idea that they are doing to provoke us to commit the same violence that we have been through the last 500 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How weird is the idea that we have the same conception of power and influence, that we need to destroy to reaffirm our existence. If we only believed in that kind of power of destruction, we wouldn't be here. Our transformation goes through sharing. It's not sharing like our secrets or our cultures or trying to turn people into being indigenous. It's not that. That is nonsense.
Mm.
But it's about sharing values and the perception of world. It's like the white guys came with their guns or the mirrors. We will be still offering medicine. And I am not talking about the medicine of the forest only, because if they had ayahuasca enough to all those guys, I just threw them in a pool. But I am talking about the medicine of the words, a medicine of the feelings, the heart, of the mind, because the understanding of how we see all this system of oppression, racism, and power is that is a spiritual illness. And we need to cure. You can give someone a poison, or you can give a medicine.
Right.
So think about, what are those people eating?
Mm-hmm.
A yellow weird corn, or a beautiful colorful corn, indigenous true corn? they have agrotoxic relations.
Keyword. That's the toxic, how toxicity feeds us, or how
Yeah.
we allowing toxicity to come into us.
In all degrees. And
It's
how do you heal toxicity? Is by feeding well.
Yeah.
So we need to share. I truly believe in the power of this wisdom, that we don't need a society that needs to accumulate or think, oh, people are, we were laughing yesterday, like, white people are afraid of dying.
Yeah, true.
We are not afraid of death. We walk with death. Death is our family. We respect it. So sharing this is building and seeding abundance, so nobody needs to believe that they will lack or something. Sharing good words, sharing good actions, and working, like stepping on the dust and walking on the earth and sitting, so nobody will have to denounce the hunger. It's really sad to see the elderly and the children going through the hunger.
Yeah.
All that illusion of power and institutions were just created to hide that, to avoid reality. I talk too much. Sorry.
Thank you. It needed to come out in the open here. Marcus, I think that's you. That's you here, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Opening the floor to you. I don't, it's always a bit overwhelming. It is overwhelming. It is, but it is so necessary. And you have also, I mean, whatever we call allies, relation. But to me, it's all about relationships.
I'll give you
You have yourself, complex ones with the outside world.
Can you restate that, Mark? We had a huge storm come through here yesterday, and as you know, we get very limited service here anyway. So the tower got knocked out, and I've had to go to town to get service here.
Oh wow! Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, pardon my tardiness here.
No. I mean, maybe. Yeah. I mean, thank you for being here. Yeah. So in the context of all these relationships that you have, and sometimes they are incomplete, they're superficial, they are, interested. Very often also, leading to this kind of repeating these old patterns of colonialism towards indigenous people so yourself, I was saying that you had also your share of this uneasy relationship to navigate, and I was wondering if you could share more about this reality that is yours, the need to have allies, and also protecting that sacred space that's your home.
Okay. Yeah, so we always have a difficult relationship. I think I I don't really know where to start. Other than to say that we have a hard time retaining our youth. For instance, here in our eco-village, we recently had to have major intervention with some of the young people that are in our community, because they're, you know, always feeling like they need to leave to go to the white world. And some people are feel like they're missing out on all the things that the white world has to offer. And it's very complicated. We've received a lot of financial support for our land debt over the last year. I think I shared this last week, the irony that we have to buy land back, our own people's land that our ancestors stewarded since time immemorial. But through this process of fundraising, I think we have built. I feel like we've built good relationships with a lot of non-Indigenous peoples. I mean, it was just stated that, you know, that it's hard because we need we need these allies, and it has been a really good experience for us. In the beginning, it wasn't. We were seeking funds from a lot of racist folks, and we got set up in positions that devolved into really piercing words that put people in tears, and this happened many times. And then we entered this realm of meeting funders that were really social justice driven, and people that weren't really paternalistic, folks that really have good hearts. And I feel like their financial gifts have been extensions of their compassion and love in their heart. So I want to say that much. I think through this fundraising process, it's probably the most I've ever interacted with white people, because of having so many bad experiences, and just because our project is all about cultural autonomy. It's about linguistic cultural retention, and you know, we're very busy people. We don't have a lot of time to interact with non-Indigenous folks. I unlike the other speakers, I'm not really. I used to be more engaged at global, you know, kind of international Indigenous rights realm, and I used to go to the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues religiously, you know, every year. And I haven't done that in over a decade because I don't have the time to focus on intergenerational transmission of language and cultural knowledge. And what I was mentioning last week, you know, like I feel like a lot of these, well, they're called researchers, I guess, academic folks that come into Indigenous communities. They write about traditional ecological knowledge. I hear a lot of Indigenous peoples talk about traditional Indigenous knowledge in general. But I mean, I know this is the reality in many Indigenous communities, at least in the colonial US and others I've been to around the world, that there are some people that have this knowledge. Some communities don't have these people that have this knowledge anymore. That's the reality of colonialism. And in our case, we're fortunate to have knowledge and language, but it's barely hanging on by a thread. And that's why the work that we do is so important, because we're raising children with these ways from the ground up, so they can be full-time Indians, that they don't have to compartmentalize their lives. They don't have to schedule a ceremony on a weekend. They don't have to schedule their time to be Indian, in other words. And I think that's been the real joy. We're able to have our ceremonies per the lunar cycle and what's happening in the natural world, not just because it's convenient for this Western workforce, the labor force that we're all, or at least those of us that are in the village now, used to be subject to. And most of our people back in Oklahoma and in Florida are still subject to that. And it's just kind of going through the motions. It's not really doing things the way that they were intended. And the way that the ceremonies were given to us to care for them in a good way and to carry out, to renew our relationship to the natural world. We were able to do it in the way it was intended now. But we're always in life negotiations with our in terms of our relationships with non-Indigenous people. The folks up the road, as I mentioned, this big storm came through yesterday, and we were afraid to go out of the village yesterday because the road was not passable. A lot of big trees had fallen into the road, but we knew that there would be a lot of non-native people out there that are part of this white supremacist organization that's just 3.8 miles up the road from us. I'm not sure if, because I came into the conversation late, I'm not sure if this is the direction. I think one thing though is I wanted to mention is that in terms of assimilation, we have visited with a number of indigenous peoples in the Amazon that are what you might call, I kind of resent the term uncontacted, because to me, these folks are, it's not that they never saw white people, it's that they saw them a long time ago and they said, oh, we don't like this shit and we're going to run to the jungle. And they did, and they just keep passing it down to their grandchildren's grandchildren, that they, there exists this culture out there that they don't want to be a part of. I mean, in a sense, that's kind of what we do in our village. We have to teach our children that there is this entirely different culture that we're constantly resisting. We're always doing it with the English because not everybody in our village speaks our language. And so when they interact with the kids, we try to limit how much they interact with the kids in English. We really try to shelter our kids so that they'll stay in our language. They all know English, at least, semi-proficiently. And I, as I mentioned, I've never spoken one word of English to my children since they were born. But, my son, he's 8. He doesn't really speak that great of English, but, you can figure out what he's saying. But it's complicated because we have to have them to think in the language first. And when you send these kids off to school, to white man's school, they learn all these academic subjects in English, and then everything else around them that they interact with, it goes to English, and they start to think only in English, and our language takes the back seat. And then they start speaking our language through an English lens, through this very kind of linear linguistic framework that English offers, or most of the Western languages offer. I don't want to go down that road, but right now, but it's very, there's so much negotiation that takes place. And so folks that we talk with in the Amazon, they ask questions about, should we let this into our village? Should we let that into our village? And I feel like we're always saying, if you don't watch it, the more that you desire from the outside, if you don't watch it, you'll become just like us. And that conversation can get a little tense too, depending on who's advocating for what. But just to say that the more we talk about traditional ecological knowledge, the communities that still have it, they could lose it very quickly. It can go so fast, just like language does, which, as I mentioned last time, is directly correlated to the intergenerational transmission traditional knowledge. If you don't have the language, I don't want to sound dismissive, but without it, you know, you kind of miss the mark a little bit. The way that things are uniquely conveyed in our languages can't be so approximated in English. So I think I'll just stop there.
Well, you were speaking of the big invader, or at least the tool that is being used to invade communities is television, right?
Yeah.
And we all know. I mean, you know, it's one of the very first thing I've done. I mean, one of the things I've done like 14 years ago, I took my TV, I put it downstairs on the street, and 5 minutes later it was gone. And I've been without TV ever since. But now we have Netflix, we have, you know, all these things, but at least I can choose what I watch. It is that big problem of how we are all, as human beings and communities, exposed to this toxic thing that we call television, or media, and yeah, exactly, Laina, the truth is powerful.
Well, I should say this about indigenous language endangerment in the U.S. and Canada, where when people talk about boarding schools, residential schools, as having such a profound impact on the loss of language, that's very true, and I never take away from that. Many of my relatives are survivors of those schools, and my in-laws as well. And but the truth is, if those boarding schools would have never happened, we would be in the same predicament with language loss today, because of one, public school system, and television. So, and I'll argue that down with anybody to the end. Television has had such a profound impact on indigenous language loss, and I saw it in, not television per se, because I haven't had a television in like 24 years, but and my children have never seen a TV in our village, in our home, nothing like that. But they have with the YouTube. And my son's English semi-proficiency is because of YouTube. It is so amazing. That's why we cut it all out. No devices for the kids, because it will take a hold of our people. Once the English gets a hold of our people, I mean, I'm not good. I'm just saying this for Maskoke people. I'm not gonna impose this teaching on anybody else. But our elders taught us, isto pumbonaka shungi bitno ashtijari don sigoro stijari mbonaka ubone ichigo no ashtijari do ichigo maktokhui matse. They said once you can't speak your language anymore, you're no longer an indigenous person, a stijari, a native person. But that teaching is kind of ubiquitous with Maskoke people, whether they're in Oklahoma or they're in Florida. And it's not entirely our fault, granted, but we're doing everything that we can to keep our language alive in our village. And it takes really serious platforms like no TV, no devices, to ensure that these children are raised as first language speakers.
Yeah. You spoke of this difficult, going back there, the uneasy relationship at the beginning of funding the ecovillage. Can you speak a little bit more about what type of funders you were referring to?
Well,
no, without naming them.
Yeah. Well, we were approaching the wrong people, really. They were independently wealthy individuals, all white males, and I had such bad luck with foundations, because we had good luck with a few, but most foundations don't support land acquisition. that's usually part of their restrictions, you know, up front. They say no land, no buildings, no capital campaigns, things like that. So a lot of folks express interest in funding our programming, and I said, well, you know, that's really nice, but if we don't have land tenure, how are we supposed to engage any of this programming? So we went to we started pursuing individual donors, and there were people that were inviting us to come and speak, but all they wanted to hear about was, you know, they want to hear somebody play a flute, or they want to hear somebody sing with a drum, and hear all these, you know, real romanticized fairy tales about Native people. And you've heard other former speakers mention these things, a common thread, and so the exotic Indian is really desired, but when you start this was funny. In the first time was a disaster, that we were invited by these group of wealthy white men. It wasn't specifically for fundraising. They knew that we would make a pitch, but they just wanted to hear about this basic noble savage that they learned about in 4th grade history. And all they could conceptualize was this real kind of mythological Native person that popped out of their history book. But when it came to actually talking about having a living culture, a living cosmological worldview, things that conflicted with their white American patriotism, and their deep Christian worldview, it all went south. The second time, somebody, probably into the first 10 minutes of talking, they said, you know, you're starting to make me feel bad, and I don't want to hear anything more about this. And I was like, I'm not really that controversial at all in the pitch. I mean, people say this to me all the time when we talk about our project. We hardly ever frame it. I might mention the genocide of our people one time, and in terms of having been forcibly removed from our ancestral homelands in 1836, again, during which 40% of our people were murdered. But I mean, that's truth. And I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I'm trying to state that we're descendants of survivors. And this individual who's got lots of money said, you know, I don't want to hear anymore, and dismissed us, and that was the end. So this, we got hopes up, and this happened several times after this. That kind of white fragility that folks talk about seemed to impede on hope of getting funders. So in Alabama, for instance, we never received any financial support for our project until this year from a foundation that reached out to us through a funding network. And they came down and did a site visit, and we were really fortunate because there were some younger people that are part of this family that came, and the older generation made several non-PC comments, and the younger people actually called them out on it. They're the nieces of these older white males, and that was really good to see. And it was a real learning experience, but we wanted them to come so that we could be truthful and have some good interaction and try to build relationship. There's so much work to be done, but overall, all the funding that we have received has come from people that have more radical minds, that are very social justice driven, and have been people that want us to be in the driver's seat, not folks that tell us how money needs to be used or question what we're doing, and they just trust, and they ask a lot of questions for clarification, and they're very humble people, very compassionate people. And so we feel like all the energy that has come into this project through a transfer of monetary gift is all contributing. The spirit that's with that cash flow, the spirit that's attached to it, is all contributing to the good energy that we want in our project. So it's not just here's some money, take it and run.
Thank you. Yeah, yeah, it's takes time, huh, to build these relationships.
Yeah. But there's it's been good for our community to see, because I'm just being honest that a lot of people, the older people in our community, just they've only ever had really superficial relationships with non-native people. I mean, superficial conversations with non-native people. Like none of the older people in our community have one white friend. And so the first time we had these millionaire folks sitting in our living room, our folks were super nervous, but it was, when they left, it was like, wow, these are like normal people, and they felt good. They were like, those are not the white people that I envision in my mind. And it's kind of this weird irony that it happens to be these wealth holders that that we experience in such a good way, and yet we live so close to not good white people.
Yeah.
And that need compassion and love too, but we only have so much energy to give because we're trying to maintain our identity, and you can't spend all your time educating white people.
Indeed. And I see that very often. I hear that very often. Yeah. Don't have the time to educate you. Just do your own research.
Yeah, I mean, it's sticky though, because you don't ever know, like what's available for the research is not always the reality. I mean, it's hard to negotiate that. But the truth is, if we're going to be Maskoke people or Chumash people or Arapaho people, whatever the people are that we come from, that we have to have the time to dedicate to perpetuating our own identities, and to do that in a holistic form is so energy and time consuming.
Yeah. So something that I have done, and it's more of a way of listening to the diversity of Native American and Indigenous people online that are using online tools, whether it's Facebook or it's mostly Twitter. That created an account a year ago, and been following silently, and sometimes being engaged when other white folks are engaged and show their racism and white privilege. But it's to listen, and there is such a wide diversity. It's not easy to navigate. But if you come from a place where you say to yourself that just listening to Big Win, to Kanyon, to Daiara, to Marcus, you see different people, you hear different voices, different histories, relationship to tradition, modernity, etc., etc. So if you go online and you start following all these Native American or Indigenous Twitter accounts, then you realize that it's not an easy journey for many. Just to reclaim, so you have harrowing stories of young men or women that have been adopted and raised into a white environment, and suddenly they find themselves saying, wow, I'm not white. And then there is all this very complicated journey to reconnect with the land, with the people, and you hear all these stories, and I think they're very necessary. So I invite people to do that. I think that Daiara, you're still here. Maybe we then we'll close here. I'm offering to, I mean, if Kanyon, Daiara, Big Win, Marcus, please, some closing thoughts.
You remind me about this thing that is the sharing of our culture and ceremonies. Actually, well, Tukano is a nation of ayahuasca, and we are really closely related to other nations that also work with that medicine. And maybe another day I could share about this history and how they decided to open it, because it was already spread in the world, and to gain a space of protagonism. And there is a whole debate on what is happening with the medicines, how it's being globalized and capitalized and everything. The thing is that there are a lot of people that actually go to the forests looking for the fairy, the fairy feathered indigenous shamans and etc., and drink ayahuasca and think that they are going to change their lives. And they go to visit my families. And so, as I am like that, I began complaining and picking every little situation to talk to them about the history of colonization. And there was always this, oh, you're upsetting us, it is too sad, we are here to be happy, not to be sad with you, etc. And so I decided it was possible and necessary to do, because I do believe that everybody needs health. We as indigenous, we need health, we need a cure or reparation, we need, I don't know what is the word in English, is we need, on a besoin, cariño. ¿Alguien habla español? No. Like
it's kindness. It's like care and love.
Yeah.
Oh,
We
kindness.
need, okay, we need care to recover our spirit from all this violence as well. The fact is that that violence has attacked our culture and our memory so hard. Indigenous communities all over the world, I know the numbers are quite the same in Brazil and Canada and Australia. The suicide numbers, because we're still dealing with a struggle to value and really have pride of who we are, and just have indigenous pride, feel honored to be indigenous. It can be really tricky when you know that being indigenous is also face all this violence. So this year I managed, last year I worked a lot on talking to these folks and trying to politicize the spiritualized ones that were looking for ceremonies and ayahuasca, and really treat about the subjects of human rights and human rights violations and what is the real panorama of indigenous nations, and also try to spiritualize the politic ones that are in social movements and talk a lot about feminism, socialism, capitalism, decolonization, etc., but still not have an opening to the possibility of understanding of our, what we so call a spiritual world, because it's too complex for them. So I began working with songs and trying to connect with people in those activity spaces, these activist spaces. And I managed to have the authorization to talk about all those violations in ceremonial spaces. Because in my nation, in the Tukano Nation, Yé'pá Mahsã Nation, our ceremonies, they're not like all this song and party. We are a people in a ceremony, we don't sing a lot all night long. Our songs are beautiful as well, but that's not the point. We just talk the whole night. When my father goes to the ceremony, he talks about the dictatorship times. He talks about the building of the indigenous movement. He tells the story of all his friends he has lost. He opens his heart and tell us about our history, because we constantly need to deal with this feeling, and we have to reconciliate with the fact that we can nurture what is best to remember without forgetting what was violence. So I had this opportunity to talk to kind of 20 people from, mostly from England, those white rich guys that wanted to have like a forest experience. That I understood when we talk with those guys, we have very much respect, because we know how difficult it is to step outside of all that comfort. And even if we know that those people are really privileged, and actually that family charges lots of money just to accept those peoples in their territories, and that's fair. We were talking about, I had this human rights research, and I had like 7 panels of crimes against indigenous nations, like from material the violations to the land, violation to the people, omission of the state, all kind of crimes. And I just put a list in front of them to tell them, listen, we have suicide, we have murder, we have rape, we have the burning of our houses, we have the hunger, we have the disease, we have the wood traffic, animal traffic, illegal manuration, human traffic. We have all of this, and we deal with it all the time. And then people began crying. And so I looked to them, and they begin like feeling culpable, guilty.
Oui. Yes, guilty.
And the point is not getting people to feel guilty of anything, because guilt won't let us to any place. We cannot forget what we have been through. That's not the point. But how to transform our experiences in facing what we do in the present to build a different future. And in this nation that I am talking, that is not the Tukano nation only, but the Yé'pá Nation in the Amazon. Through this sharing of the medicine, the youth began valuing, like really valuing our culture. Like, I don't know, this like 20 years ago, when we went to that region in the Amazon, everywhere in the Amazon, 20 years ago, before the rising of the valuing of the culture, we had lots of people drunk in the street and shy, and that didn't wanted to show that they were indigenous. But when they saw that somebody that is not indigenous could value the indigenous culture, we began to value it as well. And sharing a healing between our nations. As difficult as it is to translate or to try to communicate with these guys, You are healing us. A space like this is really a healing for us as well. That is a true collaboration. The understanding that the politics, indigenous politics, the what is politics? The relation between nations. In our tradition, we have a spiritual politics. Those politics are based on mutual respect, on sharing of the food, the medicines, and the stories. Being able to cry together sometimes, but also to celebrate. Sharing good seeds. We have this expression here in Brazil. We have seed sharings. Actually, seed sharings. People, nations gather to share seeds, to have interchange. And I hope we can continue to find new solutions to spread other kinds of seeds. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I am absolutely in love also with the experience of these other relatives from North America. It is a challenge to connect the stories of South and North America. We have very much in common, but sometimes we step apart because of the building of the idea that North America is superior, economically superior or something, or that we are poorest, but we are not. We are as rich, and we face all the same struggles. So we must connect with all the nations. I do believe in that. I work for that. And I thank so much for this opportunity and for your patience with my English and stuff. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so very much.
As an Indigenous person, and as this is coming into a close, I want to point out that as a youth raised in both traditional lands and urban territories, that sometimes I recognize some of our relatives experience that disconnect, and not in her homeland. She follows various protocols, but when she's out in her homeland, she offer a bunch of tobacco to ground herself and ask the ancestors of the land for permission to be there and for guidance, so that her words and her actions honor those whose land she is on. And my mother and my grandmother have always shared and always believed that when song, ceremony, and dancing stops, I myself recognize that, and I'm blessed with a nice singing voice. My mother says she can't sing. And I also recognize that as I am a nomadic native in the Bay Area, where many Ohlone people are officially landless, I reside on the only federally recognized Indian country between Sonoma and Santa Barbara along central coastal California in 350 square miles. Not much of California is recognized as native land. It's all native land. That being said, that as a 21st century native, I'm not afforded the luxuries that my ancestors have, as well as the heavy occurrences of colonization and impact, but we aren't afforded those luxuries to be in cultural environments where ceremony is a daily. And so I always want to remind people that we as humans do need ritual, we need ceremonies, we need to ground ourselves and reconnect to the earth. So I want to offer a hummingbird song, because whenever my mother sees a hummingbird, she's like, I know my mother's here. And hummingbird is part of our creation story here in Ohlone territory. Hummingbird, coyote, and eagle are the first people, all the animals are the first people of the world. They have always been here before humanity. They brought life to us. And so Hummingbird being that pollinator, being that one who is dancing and being present, I just want to offer a little Hummingbird song before I go. So if that's okay. And at the end of our songs, California Indigenous communities have like a affirmative or a word of affirmation, or we say "oh" to send off the prayers and the song in a good way. Sometimes when we enter or exit the roundhouse, and so "oh" is what I'm gonna close it out with. And you're welcome to join with that. Just send it out in a good way. So this is the Hummingbird Song. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Humunya, 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 weha, weha. Humunya, 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 weha, weha, ho. Oh.
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 No son, in breath, so it is in spirit. I want to thank you for your time and thank you for your energy and your presence. And remember, we are all healing. We're taking steps to honor truth and history. Let us be kind with each other and let us be assertive in that truth and stand strong. Thank you.